If you were the president's leading political opponent, the DOJ tries to literally put you in jail and give you prison time. If you are the president's son, you get a sweetheart deal.
I'm very proud of my son.
What do you say to that female independent suburban voter who feels that way, to win her back?
First of all, I won in 2020 by a lot.
Last night, he said the reason he didn't give the documents back was because he's just so very busy, and he didn't have time to respond to a grand jury subpoena because he needed to get his golf shirts and pants out of the box.
Hello, I'm Weijia Jiang in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Hunter Biden has agreed to a plea deal following a federal investigation. He has agreed to enter guilty pleas on 2 misdemeanor tax charges and admit to felony gun possession. The president's son will avoid prosecution on the gun charge if he follows conditions set by prosecutors. A federal judge in Delaware must still approve the agreement. Multiple prominent Republicans have claimed the Justice Department went easy on him. Catherine Herridge, who is CBS News' chief investigative correspondent, joins us now. Catherine, today you spoke to the chairman of the House Oversight Committee, James Comer, and I wonder how this plea agreement impacts his ongoing investigations into the Biden family.
Great question. A short time ago, we spoke with the Republican chairman of the House Oversight Committee. He's been running these investigations into the Biden family business dealings with entities overseas. He told CBS News he's disappointed with this plea agreement, given that it only involves 2 tax misdemeanors.
My first question is, what has the Department of Justice been doing investigating this for the last 6 or 7 years? We all knew he didn't pay his taxes for 2 specific years. But what we've uncovered would suggest money laundering, would suggest tax evasion, would suggest racketeering, many serious crimes, including not being a registered foreign agent. So we're very disappointed in the Department of Justice. We think this is another example of a 2-tier system of justice in America.
In response to the Republican committee's interim findings, a White House spokesman said they've shown no evidence of wrongdoing by then Vice President Joe Biden. Weijia.
And is there anything else you can tell us about what they plan to do moving forward?
Great question. We asked the chairman of the committee whether this changes the scope and the trajectory of their investigation. And he told CBS News that one of his immediate plans is to call the U.S. Attorney in Delaware, David Weiss, to Capitol Hill to testify and explain the status of that probe. As chairman, will you call the U.S. Attorney in Delaware to testify?
I think that the U.S. Attorney in Delaware will either testify in front of the House Oversight Committee or the Judiciary Committee. He needs to explain whether or not his investigation is concluded, or as he put in that statement when he says the investigation is ongoing, he needs to be transparent with congressional investigators as to what exactly he's investigating moving forward.
And the reason all of that matters is that we had these 2 statements from the different teams. Hunter Biden's legal team said it's their understanding that this years-long probe into the president's son has been resolved. But the U.S. Attorney David Weiss put out his own statement that said simply this investigation is ongoing, Weijia.
So there is even discrepancy about
Correct.
the end result here.
Correct.
Okay, well, we will continue to follow it. I know you will. Thank you very much, Catherine. And for more on this, I want to bring in Nicole Killian and Nancy Cordes. They join us right now. Nicole is a CBS News congressional correspondent, and Nancy is CBS News' chief White House correspondent. Nancy, I want to start with you because the president did speak about this for the first time since we learned about his son's plea agreement. No surprise that it was short.
I'm very proud of my son.
He has been so careful about wanting to draw a separation between anything having to do with the White House and the Justice Department. He is also a staunch defender of any family member. So what do you make of what President Biden said today?
Well, Weijia, he uttered exactly 6 words. I'm very proud of my son. And he did that here in San Francisco a short time ago in response to a barrage of questions from reporters who wanted to get his take on this plea agreement as he spoke at an AI-themed event here in San Francisco. And all he would say is that he's proud of his son, and that was it. And frankly, that's all we expect to hear from him in the near future. He has been, as you pointed out, so careful when talking about this issue for a number of reasons, chiefly that he doesn't want to inject it into the bloodstream any more than it already is. He doesn't want to get into a tit for tat with Republicans over his own son, and he doesn't want to appear to be trying to influence the Department of Justice investigating his son. So for all of those reasons, he has really remained mum. He put out a very terse statement this morning saying that he's proud of his son, and then reiterated that in person. And now he's off conducting fundraisers here in the Bay Area. And for now, unless he is pressed again, that's all we're going to hear from him about it.
And Nicole, of course, Republicans were quick to say that it's actually impossible to separate who Hunter Biden is with his plea agreement. They are calling this a sweetheart deal. And I know that you spoke with Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, today about that. Can you tell us more about what he had to say?
Yeah, that's right, Weija. Well, Speaker McCarthy did characterize this as a sweetheart deal for Hunter Biden, and he continued to talk about the same thing that Chairman Comer talked about, that he feels that this is a two-tiered justice system. But I asked him, how does he explain that, considering the attorney overseeing this case against Hunter Biden was actually a Trump appointee? Take a listen.
What you see is, if you are the lead candidate against the current president, you get indicted, but there's jail time proposed. Here you are, the son of the president. We watched other Americans with some of these same judgments or these same challenges they had before them, that they would have jail time.
Now, the speaker says that this plea agreement raises more questions and said that House Republicans will continue to follow the facts where they lead. He also says that because Hunter Biden has now pleaded guilty, he feels that the Justice Department should turn over more information with respect to this probe, something Chairman Comer is also pursuing.
Of course, Hunter Biden's team is drawing a very different picture, and his lawyer spoke out earlier today during an interview to sort of lay out exactly where the president's son is. Let's take a listen. And Nancy, I want to chat with you on the other side.
Mr. Biden had a period in his life that was troubled, where, it's very clear he didn't timely pay the taxes he was supposed to pay at the time. He subsequently has paid them, but he didn't timely pay them. I think it's a very hard question whether I would have been prosecuted for that or not. And I think I could have been, but I think that's a hard question, and it's one I can't answer.
And Nancy, we've heard from other Democrats, too, saying that, well, at least Hunter Biden is acknowledging wrongdoing, taking responsibility for it. Do you anticipate that's going to be part of their messaging when they are, hammered with how this all played out?
Right. I think that they'll try to talk about it in general as little as possible, unless they are put on the spot by events like they have been today. And they're going to try to push back when they do on this narrative that Republicans have been putting forth, as you heard Speaker McCarthy in his conversation with Nicole, this argument that somehow Hunter Biden is getting a leg up or is being given favorable treatment because he is the son of the president. Well, Democrats are going to try to turn that on its head and say, wait a minute, these misdemeanors that he's accused of, if some ordinary Joe Schmo had failed to pay their taxes, maybe they wouldn't have been pursued by DOJ at all. So in their view, Hunter Biden is not getting special treatment. And this is not over because, as you've been discussing, the U.S. attorney in charge of this case has said that the investigation goes on. So the question is, are there additional charges coming down the road? Today, Hunter Biden's lawyer said he doesn't anticipate that he wouldn't have cut this deal if he thought more charges were coming. But until the U.S. attorney says case closed, then it's open as far as we know.
Nicole, of course, if you were to ask Speaker McCarthy about it, he would say that certainly there ought to be more charges. And I want to ask you about what he said earlier, essentially saying that, there are two separate standards for the former president, who's the Republican frontrunner, and the current president's son. But in order to make that argument, the premise is that the potential penalties are the same, that the charges are somehow equal. Did he address this at all and talk about the Trump charges with you?
You know, he did to a certain extent, because I did ask him to react to this interview that has been airing with the former president and Fox News host Bret Baier that's gotten a lot of attention as of late, with the second part, of course, airing today. But, of course, we heard the former president defend his actions and his handling of classified documents, saying that he had golf clothes and shoes mixed into some of these boxes, that he didn't have time to go through them. And so I asked the speaker if that was an acceptable response.
I do believe this could have been handled so differently in the process of where it's going now. But to think what the rest of the world is seeing, that one president that has documents all the way back to being a senator, his Department of Justice is indicting.
But do you buy the former president's explanation?
Look, they can talk and they can sit down and look all the way through. But the one thing I know is the current president's Department of Justice is indicting the person that is the #1 person running against you for office.
So the speaker remains very critical when it comes to President Biden and his handling of classified documents, and noting that this dates back to his time in the Senate. But when it comes to former President Trump, he has been reticent to outwardly criticize him, instead turning this back on the situation involving President Biden. While he says he thinks the situation should be handled differently, he more seems to be implying that the investigation should have been handled differently. So again, the speaker, of course, continuing to defend the former president for now.
All right, Nicole, Killian, and Nancy Cordes, thank you very much. Nancy, safe travels back from San Francisco, where you are, of course, traveling with President Biden. Republicans have weighed in on the Hunter Biden plea deal, but how about the Democrats? New York Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman, a member of the House Oversight and Accountability Committee, joins us next. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. As we just reported, House Republicans on the Oversight and Accountability Committee are vowing to keep investigating President Biden and his family. A Democrat on that committee, New York Democratic Congressman Dan Goldman, joins us now. Congressman, thank you so much for making some time for us.
Thanks for having me.
We just heard from Representative Comer earlier in the show. Of course, as you know, he is vowing to keep investigating. And I wonder what Democrats on your committee are doing to respond to that.
Well, what we are doing is what we keep doing, which is asking him where the evidence is. He has demonstrated no actual, tangible, factual evidence in support of his very bold allegations. And what we have learned today is that a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney finished up, or seems to have finished up, a nearly 5-year investigation into the depths of Hunter Biden's finances, and determined that he could only prove 2 tax fraud misdemeanors and nothing in connection to the president and any of the president's finances. So Chairman Comer is talking about money laundering and FARA and racketeering. I was an organized crime prosecutor, and let me tell you that he's got a long way to go before he gets to any of those charges. But more importantly, the Department of Justice, a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney, examined all of those potential charges with much more powerful investigative tools than Congress has, and ultimately determined that there was no misconduct meriting charges there. So I don't know what Chairman Comer has seen, because from what I've seen, there's nothing of the sort. And this witch hunt needs to come to a close before Chairman Comer and the House Republicans get pretty close to abusing their power.
And I know you're saying that as a lawyer yourself, so I wonder what the plea agreement tells you about the investigation, which, as you pointed out, encompassed far more than the ultimate charges.
Yeah, it tells me that there's no there there. That the Department of Justice, again, a Trump-appointed U.S. attorney who wrote a letter to Jim Jordan, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, a few weeks ago, saying that Merrick Garland, the attorney general, had given that U.S. attorney, who President Biden held over from the Trump administration to maintain the obvious and necessary independence of the investigation into his son. And Attorney General Garland gave him ultimate authority to make these charging decisions. And all of these allegations put forward by the House Oversight Committee, Chairman Comer, and other House Republicans were found not to be not to be warranted and not to be supported by the U.S. Attorney in Delaware. So there are 5 years of investigations into this that turned up nothing. And I know I've looked at some of this evidence that Chairman Coleman is referencing, and it does not support his allegations. And further, there's no connection to President Biden. So what they are doing is essentially persecuting a private citizen who happens to be the son of the president in an effort to politicize a congressional investigation and hurt the president of the United States. It is unwarranted. There is no basis for it. And based on what we learned today, it needs to stop.
Well, despite all that, there is no indication that Congressman Comer will stop. And you actually just tweeted about this on Friday. You tweeted that Republicans have repeatedly shown that they have no problem attacking the FBI while deceiving the public about the sham Biden investigation. It's time for the FBI to clear the record with accurate information. So I wonder what exactly you're calling on them to do. And to your point, if this isn't going to shut down the current investigation, what is?
Right. Well, the FBI document that the Oversight Committee has now reviewed, that the Republicans continue to mischaracterize and misrepresent, has some allegations of $5 million bribes from someone to someone. It's not as specific as they make it out to be. But the person from the Burisma official who is purported to be the source of that information has gone on record to say that he had no conversations with President Biden. Now we have yet another investigator who has debunked these allegations because this was looked at by the Trump DOJ and they ultimately did not pursue an investigation of the president. And you know how we know that? We know that because if they had, we would need to have a special counsel investigating the president. And Bill Barr, Trump's attorney general, did not appoint a special counsel. So the FBI needs to clarify exactly what is and what is not under investigation. And I would like some clarity on what they did to investigate the allegations in that FBI document that were not vetted, that were not verified, and that do not include any firsthand evidence at all.
All right, Congressman Dan Goldman, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie isn't holding back in his criticism of former President Donald Trump. What the former Trump ally is saying about the boxes of classified documents found at Mar-a-Lago. Next, you're streaming America Decides.
When you think about how many days of golf he's played since he left office, maybe he could have skipped a couple of rounds of golf and gone through the boxes to respond to a subpoena from a grand jury.
Welcome back to America Decides. That was former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie continuing his criticism of Donald Trump. Unlike the majority of the 2024 field, Christie says the former president has only one person to blame for his legal woes.
The problem for Donald Trump in all of this is his own conduct. He's his own worst enemy. None of this would have happened to him or to the country if he had just returned the documents.
Ashley Etienne and Doug High join us now. Ashley is a CBS News political contributor and former communications director for Vice President Harris and Speaker Pelosi. Doug is a Republican strategist and the former communications director for the RNC. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
So, Doug, I want to start with you because obviously we know we've been talking about how Donald Trump is still very popular. So what is Chris Christie doing here? Is it enough to make the case that, he's willing to stand up against Trump? Is that a winning argument?
Well, it may not be a winning argument for Chris Christie, but it's part of an argument that he sees as necessary for how the Republican Party can function moving forward. We see, obviously, Donald Trump is leading in the polls. We've seen a little bit of a pullback on that based on the indictment. And what Christie refers to is what we sort of obviously see so often about Trump being his own worst enemy, not just in his conduct, but the Bret Baier interview where he just gave evidence after evidence to prosecutors of here's more ways you could find him guilty if you didn't think that you had enough. And so what we see is this nomination isn't going to go around Donald Trump. It's going to go through him. So you've got to take Trump on directly. Christie's the only one who's really doing it at this point. As we see Trump drop in the polls a little bit, we might see more Republicans standing up a little bit more to Trump. They've tried to avoid him thus far. Long term, that's not possible.
I'm glad you brought up that interview because I want to play a clip from the former president's interview with Bret Baier last night.
In 2016, you said that. I'm going to surround myself with only the best and most serious people.
Well, I did do that.
Your former Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, said he's not supporting you. You mentioned National Security Advisor John Bolton. He's not supporting you either. You mentioned Attorney General Bill Barr, says you shouldn't be president again, calls you the consummate narcissist and troubled man. Why did you hire all of them in the first place?
Because I hired 10 to 1 that were fantastic.
So we play this because, I covered Trump, and I know that he has a hard time, shall we say, acknowledging blame for any of his actions, including this classified documents case, which the trial is set to begin in August. So do you think that his lack of accountability will hurt him, or is this just playing into what his base wants to hear?
Well, that's really where the party, we see the divisions. Trump is leading, obviously, in every poll, and a lot of that support is unshakable. But he's not necessarily at 60% or 70%. And so where we see that Trump is in a dominant position, or people say he's in a dominant position, he's winning, and he's winning more than a plurality. He's got a majority right now. But that seems to be shrinking a little bit. And it's why other Republicans are trying to step up and take him on directly or indirectly. Trump keeps giving them the opportunity to do so because we're not going to be able to win as Republicans with just the Trump base. Those people who voted for Donald Trump in 2016 and Joe Biden in 2020, they're not coming back. And that's Arizona, that's Georgia, that's potentially North Carolina as well. That math gets very difficult if Donald Trump is our nominee.
And Ashley, I want to turn to Hunter Biden because today Republicans...
No questions about Trump. I got something to say about Trump.
Republicans spent a lot of time comparing the Trump case to the Hunter Biden case, saying that
very different cases.
It's a sweetheart deal.
Absolutely. One does not involve President Biden, and one involves an independent citizen, Hunter Biden. Here's the thing, though, about Hunter Biden. I'll say the same thing about Hunter that I say about Trump, which is no one's above the law. The Department of Justice investigated this for 5 years. A Trump-appointed U.S. attorney investigated this for 5 years. Joe Biden did not shut down the investigation. He didn't get any credit. Can you imagine Donald Trump pursuing his own son and using the Department of Justice to investigate his own son? Absolutely not. So Joe Biden believes no one's above the law. His son admitted guilt. They found 2 charges, tax evasion as well as gun charges. But it falls very short of what the GOP promised. They were talking about there's this international scheme to bribe foreign dignitaries and embassy, in Ukraine, and they've not found evidence to match that. And so that's the problem. So for me, it calls into question whether or not the House Oversight Committee should continue their investigation. It was Comer who actually, the chairman, who said about the Mueller investigation, if Mueller and the force of DOJ can't find evidence on Trump to connect the Russia investigation to him, then the Oversight Committee needs to walk away. So that's got to be the case now. If DOJ couldn't find it, and guess what? No one wanted to find dirt on Donald Trump on Joe Biden more than Donald Trump. You know that. You follow Donald Trump. And if DOJ couldn't find it under Trump, then it's likely not there. So the committee, to me, has to walk away. And it raises questions. How much more taxpayer money are we going to put behind these allegations? The GOP, as Dan said, the GOP, and Dan and I were on the impeachment committee together. And to Dan's point, the GOP have this pattern of putting the conclusion of investigation ahead of the evidence. They can make a conclusion and then they go out in search of the evidence. The evidence isn't here. What we found was taxes and gun charges, and he's admitted to them, and now he's taking responsibility for it.
Well, that is the exact point that Congressman Goldman tried to make, but for now, the investigation continues. So thank you both for joining us. I wish we could talk to you for much, much longer, but unfortunately, that's all the time we have. Thank you.
All right.
Well, that does it for today. You can stream America Decides Monday to Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern. You're streaming CBS News.